on the way.
Boogeyman band coming round the bend. Is Boogeyman band? Is Boogeyman band?
Welcome, everyone. This is your buddy Boogeyman Ben. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing something a little different here. I have a guest, daughter of my buddy from the Salem's Lot minority, that being Danny Evans, my brother. And this is Gracie Evans. She's joining me. We're going to be talking horror and just sort of talking about, what got her into the genre. And then also the fact that she was working on The Walking Dead for a number of years, 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Gracie?
Yep, that's right. Five years.
That's a long time. So just give me a little background. I know that you're a big fan of Scream, if I'm not mistaken. So was that sort of your first forte into the genre, or did it start before that?
It actually wasn't. It started a lot before that because I didn't see Scream until high school.
Mm-hmm.
I remember actually, my dad's a big fan of Salem's Lot. He talked
I
about
heard of
it.
it.
He talked about it like all the time and how it traumatized him as a kid. And I remember begging him to like let me watch a scary movie. And he told me when I was 12 I could watch a scary movie. So my very first scary movie was The Sixth Sense.
Oh, really?
It was, yeah, and like I remember that like it was yesterday. But that was really my intro into it. And then all my friends grew up on horror. Um and then when I got to high school, sleepovers and stuff, one of
Oh,
my
yeah.
best friends introduced me to the Scream series, and the rest is history. I've been watching them constantly since then.
So did you? I have you been happy with? I know that there's been some shakeups a little bit with Spyglass and just Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega not being a part of it, and them losing their director for part seven. I'm curious if you've liked the new iterations, like with I know it was just called Scream, but it was the fifth movie, and then Scream Six. I was curious if you liked those, or you were more into the Wes Craven era of the films.
I love them all for different reasons. I think the Wes Craven era is still, I mean, even though it was high school for me and that was like,
Mhm.
10 years ago, like it's a little bit nostalgic for me just because I it makes me think of the first time like I watched movies like that.
Mhm.
But I did really like the new ones. I liked they recognized that
Like,
they were reestablishing what they had.
mhm.
Um, I would honestly say that the sixth one, the most recent one, would probably fall into like my second place out of all of them. I just,
That's funny. That's mine
you
too.
know,
It's
the
mine too. And I grew
toys.
up with the old ones, so it's like I think with the sixth one, I think the smartest thing they did, not to cut you off, but I think
No,
the
you're fine.
smartest thing that they did was they switched locations. It wasn't Woodsboro. I think they also did some smart things with kind of tying back to the other ones with the mystery of like here's the clue from this is somebody from this is Roman from the third film, and this is Richie from the fifth film. So I thought that was really smart the way they did that, because then they kind of brought everything full circle a little
Oh
bit.
yeah. Well, and I did like how they also, without giving things away, they followed a lot of the same formula that they followed with the first one. Like,
Mm-hmm.
spoilers and stuff, but
Oh, the movie's been out a year. That's fine.
yeah, it's been out a while. Like Richie,
Mm-hmm.
being he's the boyfriend of the main character,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of parallels like Sydney and Billy, and then you have it's, the boyfriend's family in the
Mm-hmm.
second one getting
Which is
revenge.
very
Like I
much like
like
the second one, yeah.
exactly, but I mean you never would have guessed it 'cause you didn't know they were his family. Like,
No, and I thought that was really smart because they kind of established that the one girl, I'm blanking on her name right now, but the roommate lost her brother, and that her dad's the cop, and then when you think she's gone, you're like, oh god, he lost his whole family, and then you realize they're all tied together, and they're actually Richie was a part of that family. So I think that was really a smart way to sort of. Some people didn't like it though. I remember a lot of people thought that it kind of fell apart at the end, and I actually really thought it was well done at the end. I mean, they always kind of go bonkers at
yeah.
the end with the Scream movies. It starts as kind of a mystery, and then it's sort of like, even with the first movie, I mean, Billy and Stu stabbing each other in the kitchen. I mean, that was first time I saw it, because growing up in the slasher genre, I mean, I was born in 74, so the 80s and early 90s, especially the 80s, was, you had the same killer in every film, and then the Scream films, it's like you have the same victims are the survivors that are continuing on, instead of like Adrian King from the original Friday the 13th. She dies at the beginning of part 2, so it's like she's not even really in it. So then it's like, oh, here's a new crop of people that this killer is going to go after. So it was kind of different for me. And the first time I saw Scream, I saw it with my friend Tori, and I remember we went Christmas time, and I remember going to see it, and I was like, I was really into it. But then when Billy and Stu turns out that there's these two killers, I remember it threw me off at first, and then I went and saw it again, and then I went and saw it again, and then I really just liked it. And then I loved the fact that it was going to be a trilogy, because they were, talking about it even back in '97 that it was going to be a couple of films. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that like, to your point, I think it's good that Radio Silence, the people that made the last couple, have they didn't sort of disconnect themselves from what Craven had done. Whereas I think with the Halloween franchise, if I can sort of get into that a little bit, that's been my problem with the Halloween films, is that they're always like, okay, we're not going to talk about these sequels anymore. Now it's just a sequel to the original.
Right.
But then you're sort of disappointing people that grew up with, those other films, in my opinion. And I feel like it's lazy. So I feel like at least the Scream writers, and James Vanderbilt, I believe, is one of the screenwriters. He actually wrote Zodiac, the David Fincher film. And I love his writing, and I was so glad to see he was one of the people that was on the new Scream films.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I like that, like, cheesy and meta is kind of the new thing, like, and they recognize, I think the problem is, like, the new reboots and stuff don't really recognize that they try to be something new. And I like that Scream, like you said, goes to the old fans and like the new fans and stuff, and like they're still watchable no matter what order you watch them in.
Oh yeah, you can watch them by themselves. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to like watch all, like, you don't have to watch 2 or 3 of them and then get to 4. You could just watch 4, and it's its own contained kind of story, and it kind of gives you like, oh, okay, well, this is what happened, and this is why they're where they are now in terms of the characters.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and I think Jenna Ortega is just great. Like, she's carries the movie on her back.
She blows my mind because I had never seen her before, and when I saw Scream. My experience with Scream 5 was weird. My wife and I were supposed to go see it. My wife got COVID, and I had already bought tickets, and my wife said, just, go see it. And it was just a really bad week, and I went by myself to see it. And I didn't know what to expect at first, because I was like, well, it's been a while. Wes Craven was a big part of my childhood, and him passing away, it was like, I'm like, how is this going to... Wes Craven had a distinctive look and feel to his films, and I was like, but I loved Ready or Not, which was Radio Silence had done that film, and I really liked that movie.
I loved that movie
with Samara Weaving, and I said, okay, well, I think they're good to pick up the mantle. And when I watched it, Jenna Ortega, right away, just that first opening scene, I was like going, okay, I hope she's the lead. And then I said, oh, they're not going to kill, because, typically with the Scream films, they kill the people in the first scene. And I was glad that she didn't die, because there's just certain actors that just have a presence, and they have a charisma to them, and just natural. They're just natural. And I just felt like she was very natural. And I loved that about her. And I actually felt like she was a better protagonist than Melissa Barrera was in Scream 5. I felt like Melissa Barrera got better, and I felt like in Scream 6 she found her footing, and I actually really thought she commanded in that one. Whereas
for sure
in 5, I was a little uncertain until it started, as it moved along, I liked her more. But Jenna, right out the gate, she's just amazing, and I've loved everything that she's done that I've seen so far.
Oh yeah, and you bring up a good point talking about like that first scene. I did like how the newer ones, they really they knew how to throw their audience off, because you get used to the patterns of the movies and everything like that.
Very true.
And then like you said, they don't kill her in the first scene, or like in the last one, you've got the 3 killers, and then. Speaking of Samara Weaving as well, that first scene of the 6th one, they set it up to be like, you've seen the first death, and then he takes his mask off, and I thought that was just
that threw me off.
Gave me chills.
I was like, we're gonna see, because and then he just pulls the mask off, and then you're following him just in his regular life, which was something you hadn't seen before. I think that that's one thing that they've done well, is kind of throwing the audience a little bit
For
with
sure.
that. And again, one thing I loved, and this is just a small point, Samara Weaving, of course, was the first victim in Scream 6, and she was dressed like there was it was like she was, the way that she looked was very reminiscent of Janet Leigh from Psycho. I think that was something that they did. If you
Oh.
look at the outfit she's wearing, it's almost very, it's of course it's a more modern, but in terms of what she's wearing, it's very much akin to Psycho. In fact, the those two guys that are the guy that did that, if you go into their apartment, there's a giant Psycho poster. So I always wonder if that was kind of like little touches there, here and there.
Oh,
So little things
I'm
like that,
sure
and
it
the fact that
was.
they're watching Jason Takes Manhattan was another great thing, because I grew up on that movie, and so many people ripped that movie, and I loved it because they're always like, "Oh, it's Jason takes a cruise ship. He's not even in Manhattan for very long." And I'm like, "But it's still a fun movie. It's like you can't take it
Yeah.
seriously. It was fun." And I remember going to see that movie with my friends, and I was the only one that liked it. So it was kind of cool that they paid a little homage to it in that scene. Um,
Yeah, I think the modern horror sometimes you can't take seriously. Like, but
no,
in a good way. Like, I think it's good that it doesn't take itself too seriously anymore. Like like I said, meta's kind of the new thing. So,
very much so.
you
And
know,
Scream kind of started that, because there wasn't a lot of that in the 80s and 90s. Not 90s is like, 96 when the first Scream came out. And then you're saying, oh, they're like me. And that's why Randy was such a big character for me. Like, he was my favorite character, always will be, because that was me growing up. I was the one, throwing out the little quips and the references and things like that. And so it's like, that's why Scream 2 breaks my heart still, because they killed Randy. So it's like,
oh,
which
I
I still,
know.
yeah, it's still a sour note with me. And it's like, I loved the movie until that point, and I still like the movie a lot, but when they killed Randy, it kind of drove a stake through my horror film
Oh
nerd heart.
yeah. Well, and I don't know if you've ever read about I notice it every time I watch now during that scene, they hint at the killer being a woman
Mm-hmm.
because of there's like the lipstick on his hand. I don't
Oh
know if
no, I actually didn't see that. I need to check
there
that out.
is. If you look, they open the van door and he's got his hand. I can't remember if it's like
Oh,
up on his chest or off to the side or something. And if you
is
look
it
on
the
his
quick
hand,
when they pan to him, like when they open, they slide the door open and he's laying there? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. I'm gonna look now.
there's like a kiss mark right here on his hand and lipstick, and it's kind of your first like.
Yeah, it's Mrs. Loomis. I need to check that out though. I actually found out a Salem's Lot thing. Somebody pointed it out to me, a friend of mine. He said that there's a Texas Chainsaw Massacre reference in Salem's Lot that I never picked up on. Um, and there's a scene in the movie where Mark, one of the leads, is practicing for his pageant at school, and it pans through his room. You can see a Leatherface mask that's sitting on top of one of his shelves, and a friend of mine circled it and sent it to me and said, "Did you ever notice
Oh
this?"
my
No,
gosh.
I've never noticed that before. And I'm like, "Oh my god." And it's like every once in a while I'll discover something new, and it's because of like your dad and Sam and other people that just say, "Oh, did you notice this?" So like, I like that. I like finding out like little Easter eggs. So that lipstick one I'm gonna have to check out for Scream too.
I can't take credit for finding that one myself. I
But
think
you
I read
told
it
me about
somewhere
it, so
or
I'm giving
something.
you credit for it.
Thanks.
Are there other franchises I mean, like within the horror genre, are there other like ones that you're into? Like, are you excited for? I know that they're supposedly doing another Smile movie. I don't know if you like the original one that came out.
Oh,
Smile 2 is supposed to come out this year.
I was thinking about that movie recently. Actually, I think it was yesterday. I was thinking about the movie because it has such an underrated like
It's
ending.
scary.
It's just like pure horror. I loved that movie, and I was talking to my dad recently about that scene with the therapist in the house and stuff.
Oh, that one's creepy. Where she just smiles really, like it's just the close up of her face, and you see it kind
Yeah.
of just, yeah. It's that it. I watched it like about a week ago, and I was like again, and I was like there's some good moments that really get to you,
Oh
and
yeah. Um, Another one I'm excited about. Well, so cheesy horror wise, I'm a big Final Destination fan. I mean, I know that's more of a gore. type thing, but I'm looking forward to the new movie. I don't know if you've seen, they've got a new one coming out.
Yeah, I've heard rumors about it. It's been I mean, the last one came out in 2011, so that's a long time ago, and that one was in 3D. The last two they did were in 3D, and I remember I didn't see the Final Destination is my least favorite, the one at the racetrack. I didn't like that one.
Yeah.
But the last one I thought was brilliant because it tied into the first one. It was like a prequel to the original one, and it
The ending is my
oh yeah,
favorite.
oh the dust when as soon as he puts the earphones on, you hear dust in the wind. You're like, oh god, it's like that.
So good. And the whole thing about when the dude that he accidentally killed and kind of took his life, when they're like, oh, he had a blood vessel is gonna burst any day, and you're like, oh my god.
It was that one again, very smart writing. And over a decade since we've gotten a Final Destination, so it'll be really interesting to see where they go with them. I still think the first one I like a lot. I'm terrified of flying, so that's probably one of my biggest fears is flying. So I don't like that one, scares me, so I have a hard time watching it. But the second one is probably my favorite, just because freeway accident is one of the most beautifully creepy choreographed scenes I've ever seen in my life, and
it's so good.
And I remember my wife and I we were dating at the time. We went on I think we went on a Monday, and it was like empty, and we sat like in like maybe third row from the screen, and when that freeway crash happened, she jumped like out of her chair. I mean, it was just like, because it's so, again, I've watched behind the scenes of it. So they did try to do the logs rolling off the truck as a real practical effect, but they said all they do is just kind of go to the side, and they wanted them to hit the ground and bounce backwards. So they had to put in the special effects, but they did try it with the real log truck and real logs. And it was kind of cool to see how they actually staged the entire thing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that still gets me to this day. And I like the third one. The roller coaster one was good. I like Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and she's a great actress, and I love her and everything I've seen her in. So that's the positive for that. But I was mad that Tony Todd wasn't in it as the mortician. I was glad he came back for the fifth one, and I'm hoping that maybe they'll include him in the new one, because I feel like he's kind of a connector, and I like when they have
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and they killed off, I believe it was the only character that survived any of the movies, and I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've watched them, but can't remember which one it was she was from. It might have been the first or second one.
Clear Rivers,
Clear Rivers, yes.
Ali Lauder's character. Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe they killed her off, so they don't really have any legacy characters they can bring back for that new one.
No, and they had two scripts for the second one. So they had one where Clear had died and Alex was still alive. And then they had one where Alex died and Clear was still alive. Because I think what happened was Devon Sawa didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's why they went a different route. And that was tough, because I'm like going, well, he was your protagonist in the last one. She was one of them, but he was the main guy. He was the one that had the premonition. He was the one that saw what was going to happen. Original ending at Final Destination is very different. And it's a complete, if you have the Blu-ray or the DVD, I don't know if you have it, but it shows what the original ending was. And they said the movie played brilliantly, and then it got to that ending, and it just like brought people hated it. It's so different for that film, because that film's like a roller coaster, and that ending is just much more, I don't know, just wrong. Yeah. Something for a different movie.
I have to ask, how do you feel about It Follows? Because I know they're coming out with the new one.
I don't know how the new one's gonna go. I like the original one. I love Disaster Piece did the music on it, and I think that music is amazing. The score is very great, and he was a video game composer. So it's a really good score. I actually have the score. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I did see it when it opened, and I did like it. I think Micah Monroe is the actress that was in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was great.
Oh no, it was good, and it's creepy, because it's kind of like The Ring. Just it's kind of like I don't know. It's almost like a venereal disease kind of in terms of like the subject matter of this thing that just follows you around, and then you have to pass it on to somebody else. It's really creepy.
I think the whole, like, so I was actually on the way to the convention my dad and I went to. I was explaining the concept of the movie to him, and
yes.
Well, and it's freaky because there's never any running, there's never any, like, it's something about just like the simplicity of it is really.
It's been I mean, that one came out 9 years ago, so I'm curious, like, what are they gonna? I mean, because they kind of alluded to the fact that because she passed it at the end, and it was kind of like, okay, so this thing is just going to keep going until you pass it as well. But just the fact that only you could see it, and that's what I think is really creepy. Again, I haven't watched it in a long time. It's like I get sidetracked and I keep watching the same 10 movies, so it's like this. I have my loop. Like, I drove my wife crazy because at Christmas time I kept watching Black Christmas, and she's like, "Going, are you watching Black Christmas again?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's a comfort movie." I don't know if you've ever heard of that one, but it's a great.
I've heard of it. I don't think I've seen it.
The original one. They've done 3 Black Christmases. The original came out when I was born, 1974. And it's directed by the same guy that did A Christmas Story. So if you've ever seen A Christmas Story, Bob Clark did it. And
I love that movie.
It's a creepy movie because it's set in a sorority house. It has great actors in it like John Saxon, Margot Kidder, Olivia Hussey, and it just deals with this creepy man that gets into the sorority house, and you never know who he is. And it's kind of like, a lot of people have said that John Carpenter kind of incorporated that point of view opening from Black Christmas, because you're seeing everything from the killer's perspective. You only see the killer in like shadows, and like you'll see like maybe his eye through a doorway, but you never see him.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, really scary. And then they remade it in 2006, and then they did another one in 2019, and I haven't seen the 2019 one. I saw the 2006 one.
I'm gonna have to give that a watch because that sounds right up my alley.
Do you have the app Shudder?
I don't.
It's on that right now. Sometimes they have some good flicks on there, and I've subscribed to it for 8 years, so I've had it for a while.
Oh, wow. To Shudder?
Yeah, Shudder.
Yeah.
It's I'm trying to think what it's only like, I think it's like $7 a month, so it's really cheap.
Well, so Walking Dead shares a lot of I don't know if you watched Creepshow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Walking Dead shares a lot of the same makeup artists and director and extras casting. I had applied one day and they reached out to me for one of the episodes, so I didn't know what Shudder was back then.
Yeah, because I think that's where they air everything. Yeah.
Yeah, the episode. Yeah. The Finger with DJ Qualls. Like, they asked me, and the reason I turned it down, they asked me if I was comfortable like lifting my skirt on camera, and I wasn't about that, and so I was like, no, thank you. I was 18.
Good. Stick to your guns about stuff like that.
Yeah, I want to say I was 18. I was like pretty young. I was at the oldest 19, and that one I did go back and watch the episode, and I'm really glad I said no. Someone else ended up doing it, and the girl that I would have been gets her head cut off at the end by the pet. Like, it would have been cool to have a model of my head, watch it get destroyed, because it did get destroyed in like a garbage disposal or something. But
this sounds so familiar. I might have seen this one.
Yeah, well, and this one had a lot of Walking Dead alumni. Mainly makeup artists were like detectives and an angry guy on the road. So it was weird seeing a lot of familiar faces, but I'm glad I didn't do that one.
And since we're sort of going into The Walking Dead, I mean, The Walking Dead was a huge thing for me, and I always just was fascinated that you and your dad, were both kind of involved in it, and like you were heavily involved in it. It sounds like. I mean, so I'm curious, like, how did that come to be? Like, how did you get involved?
Well, so I had been a fan of The Walking Dead for a really long time. That was actually around the time I got into horror. It was like one of those things. My best friend watched it, and I wanted to watch it, but my parents said no. And then it turned into, you can watch one episode, and then they ended up like proof watching the episode before I watched it, and then they got hooked. So they're like, well, we're hooked, so now we can't tell you can't watch it. So I was already into it, and then I did extra work on the Hunger Games.
Oh, wow.
Back in yeah, well, the second one back in 2012, I believe it was. And so that was kind of how I started knowing how to do extra work, and that was the only time I did it as a minor. But I was like, I want to do this as my college job, you know, get some extra money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there was one day I was in school, um, and I had gone to an internship thing I had in the morning, and I had applied a few days before. I saw they were looking for it. There was always the keywords like slender or you know, you
Mm-hmm.
got the idea that's what they were looking for. I applied, didn't hear anything, and then the next day they posted again. Um, and it was like I want to say it was like 10 a.m. and I
Nice.
just responded to the post and instantly got an email from the extras casting director who I ended up working with forever. Um,
Nice.
and she was like, "Can you get to Sonoy right now?" And
Oh,
I
wow.
lived
It's
I lived
quick.
at the time 2 hours from Sonoy, so I was like, "I'm on my way. Like my ETA is gonna be forever." But I jumped in the car and I went and I called my mom and I was like, I'm going to work on The Walking Dead. And she was like, don't you have class? And I was like, I'm not going to class. Like
Dropped out.
she was like, are you crazy? So I ended up going, worked as a zombie. I worked as like it was
Oh,
season
wow.
8. I felt did a scene with the garbage disposal where or not what do you call it? It was like a giant garbage
Oh, like compactor kind of thing.
compactor, yes. And
Okay.
we all got led into it and crushed up
Oh,
into little
awesome. I gotta,
pieces.
yeah, I have all these seasons too. I have every season on my shelf back here of this
Oh
Walking
yeah.
Dead.
Well, and
Yeah,
it's
1
funny.
through 10 or 11. Yeah.
I was such a big fan of the show too, and I got on, I made some friends who had been there all season,
Oh, wow.
and it was the episode after Carl died.
Oh,
And
that was
so
a
they
rough
were
one.
talking about it, and I was like, whoa, like Carl died. Because, you know, I'm like, I'm just caught up with what was aired already.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was season 8. I was a zombie the whole time. And then I got really lucky in season 9. Nadia Hilker and her group, Magna and Yumiko,
Mm-hmm.
came around
Oh,
and
what? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and they needed a stand-in for Magna, and I happened to be same exact height and weight. So I started out as her stand-in, and then I got really lucky because then Maggie came back to the show.
Mm-hmm.
So then I stood in for Maggie the rest of the time. I doubled, but I was promoted to full-time stand-in, especially when COVID happened. We were only
Yeah.
permitted 5 stand-ins at a time. So I was Maggie among like half the other characters because if there were more than 5 characters in a scene, we were multiple people at a time, so we only had 5 people to rotate through, smaller numbers on set.
Wow.
But
That's incredible.
very cool experience. It was nice being like on staff and full time. It was great.
And I'm a huge fan of the show. I wasn't into zombie movies. I so many of my friends were. I just never really got into them. I had a friend that I used to work with named Jeremiah, and he was big into the comics. He's like, "You need to read these comic books," and I'm like, going, "Eh." It's like I'm
Yeah.
not really into them. And then when Frank Darabont, who's probably one of my favorite filmmakers of all time,
Oh yeah.
when I saw his name attached to it, I'm like, I'm watching it just because from just Shawshank, Green Mile, The Mist, anything that he's written. He was a co-writer on Nightmare on Elm Street 3. He wrote The Fly 2. He's been involved in like a lot of genre stuff. And so that's what got me into it. Plus Norman Reedus, because I was already a fan of Norman from Boondock Saints and 8mm and Blade
Yeah.
2. So that's what got me into it. Was those
Yeah,
people.
he was really fun to work with too. He like was I want to say I didn't even work with him in the first season that I worked on there. I want to say I didn't even work with him in the first season that I worked on there.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, so many zombie scenes, I don't know, I don't remember what his character was doing at the time, but he wasn't really around the zombies too much. I was there for the cattle call days, like I was not, I was in the
Yeah.
big crowds but he ended up, I mean, becoming one of my favorite people to work with. He's very sweet.
Yeah, I met him at a con in 2012. It was right as season 2 was ending. It was him and Steven Yun, and I was unemployed at the time. I had just lost my job and I was depressed, and I went to this. It was called Image Con, so it was Image Comics put out The Walking Dead. So Robert Kirkman was there and Todd
Oh,
McFarlane was
wow.
there, and it was like I didn't have a lot of money. I had a budget, and it was $25 to meet one of them, and I didn't want to spend 50 because I didn't have a lot of money. So I said, well, I want to meet Norman. So got
Oh.
in line. I was third in line. I remember talking to him about 8mm, and he was shocked that I remembered that he was in that movie. And he said that he purposely intimidated Nicolas Cage in that scene, and that Nick Cage said, "Oh, you were so intimidating in that scene. It was great." So we talked and shook his hand, got my autograph picture, and after that, it's like he just blew up. And I remember going to like the Walker Stalker cons. They had a couple here in San Francisco area at Fort Mason, and his lines were just insane.
Oh yeah.
And I missed out on meeting Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who's another actor I really love, and I just missed out on the photo op just by like a hair. It was like they were like, "Oh, we just sold out." I'm like, "Damn."
You know, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, I think one of my favorite memories from that show was watching him be a set parent.
Oh, really?
He brought his son was a walker, a featured walker in season 11. So I remember I was standing in next to his son in this hole in the fence at Alexandria. And I just remember seeing his phone slide underneath the fence. He was trying to take pictures from under there while they were rehearsing. It's just
Yeah,
too funny. He had the backpack, the
that's really
definitely
cute.
set parent.
Oh, that's sweet. I know his wife was in the episode where it showed like where Lucille came from, and his wife was Lucille and she became a zombie, and that was a I think that's when they had that, it was that kind of in between season 10 and 11, it was that
Yeah.
those smaller episodes. That one blew me away because that was like you got to see who he was and like how he became Negan and everything, which I think was, or the Negan that we saw like when when he
Yeah.
shows up, which for some reason upset so many people. And I'm like going, but that's what everybody wanted to see. And then when they actually saw what he did, it seemed like people disconnected from the show. I kept watching the show. The thing that threw the show off for me a little bit towards the end was just how they structured it, because it would be like, here's 8 episodes, 6 months, here's 8 episodes, 6 months,
Yeah.
and just like going, okay. I for the last, and I think I told you this the last time I talked to you, um the last 8 episodes, I waited till they aired all seven, the first seven, watched them all in the finale at the same time. I just said I can't do I couldn't do it anymore because it takes away the momentum.
Yeah.
It just took away the impact.
Season 11 was so many episodes. Like it was
Like 24
20,
episodes.
it was 24, yeah.
Yeah.
And like I remember, well, and it's funny, I initially, like the whole time I was thinking, okay, at the end of this, I'm gonna be out of a job. I need to find a new one. And I remember I was thinking there were, we were all sleep deprived and it was, 10-hour days, and it especially didn't
That's
help.
hard.
And 10-hour days were generous of them to give us because most studios don't give you that.
Mhm.
But I had 2-hour drive there and back every day and all that stuff. And I remember they released 22, the script for it, and I, for some reason, like had convinced myself there were only 22 episodes, and I read it and I was like,
Weekend.
is this it? And I remember, and then finally, I was like, I went to one of my friends and I was like, that I was just lost. I was at a loss for words, and I was like, what is happening? And she was like, well, I don't know. And I was like, well, where does everyone go? And she was like, I don't know. And I come to find out there were 2 more episodes we were doing. So I was like, I don't know how we're gonna stretch this over a month, but okay. Like
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know why after Glenn died, it seemed like some people just jumped ship and they were just like, "Oh, okay, I don't want to watch this anymore."
that's usually what you hear is that I stopped watching after Glenn died. And I remember very specifically, one of our producers who was like one of our biggest advocates
Hmm.
during, I believe it was during that season, we were at Hilltop a lot, and that was
Hmm.
when it got burned down and stuff,
Yeah.
and we ended up having to go back there for the 11th season. And I remember we were talking to her and she goes, man, I tried to get them to burn this place down once and we're back here again somehow. Like I remember
Funny.
that was the big thing is everyone hated Hilltop.
Really?
We all hated going there. They another phrase she used to use was it was always so hot at Hilltop because it was the closest place on earth you could get to hell because it was so hot there. All the bugs, like I got sent home one day, me and 3 other people got sent home one day because we had allergic reactions to the weeds surrounding it.
Oh wow.
There was like I can't remember, I think it was called like broomweed or something, or it was like
Never heard of it.
something in the air after it rained, and four of us ended up getting sent home with allergic. Like it was just
Wow.
horrible set to be at, but the people made it, you know.
No, it looked like it was isolated because I know, like for the prison, it was the back of the studio. That's what they made look like the prison, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly. But Hilltop always looked like it was far out from
Yeah.
everything else.
The
But
prison was the Savior compound at one point, I believe. That back of the studio, that was where the
Mhm.
Savior compound
I
was, and
did hear about
eventually the
that.
Commonwealth
Okay, yeah, the
development was.
Commonwealth was cool looking. It was cool how they could. I'm really, oh, I'm always impressed by set decorators, like how they can make something seem like a completely new surroundings, and it's the same place that you've seen in like other seasons. Just they were different, entities.
Yeah. Well, on our first day of working at the Commonwealth, because we saw this, I mean, we were there all the time. We saw it getting built up, and we saw them painting the buildings red, and we were like, "This is new," because we're used to seeing brown and you know, brown and green and stuff like that. And we had just like a few minutes for them to thank the set decorators and the set painters and the people that created these awesome, like, because the Commonwealth was so like expansive. I mean, you see like the giant clock tower looking thing in the train station, like it was incredible. So we even like took a few minutes out of our day, just they wanted to recognize them because of how impressive it was and how long they spent on it.
I've only been on. I was an extra in one movie. It was a
Really?
Robin Williams movie from. It's a Disney movie called Flubber. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It
Yeah,
came out in like
yeah.
97. It came out, but they were recruiting at my college, um, and they were like, they didn't say what it was. They just said, "Oh, we're recruiting for this film," and I had a headshot because I had been involved in speech. So my teacher had taken headshots of us before we went to this competition. So I gave them that headshot and they called me. And I remember I was sick. I had a bad head cold and my car had just been broken into. So I was
Oh my
having my
gosh.
window fixed and I had to drive to Stanford, which is the Stanford College, which is pretty far from where I lived at the time. It was at least a good 2 hours,
Oh my
and it was a
gosh.
night shoot. And all we were supposed to do is we were supposed to be walking out of the basketball stadium. So all the basketball scenes were shot on Treasure Island, but the exterior was Stanford. And so I did a couple of days on the Treasure Island interior shots, and then I did the exterior one. And the exterior one that I did at Stanford, Robin Williams was there, and so was Chris
Oh
McDonald
wow.
and Marcia Gay Harden. And what was a trip is I was standing with this young lady. Her name was Tony, if I remember correctly, and we were standing by this light post, and we were supposed to just they were supposed to say action. You crossed the parking lot and walked around the back of the stadium, and I just saw this man standing by another light post and I'm looking at him and I'm like going, that's Robin Williams.
Oh
And
my
somebody
gosh.
and Tony, my friend Tony says, oh no. She said, no, that's his stand-in. And I said, no, that's Robin Williams. I've been watching this guy since I was a kid. And it was him. And they kept saying, don't bother the actors, don't do this. As soon as they said cut back to one, everybody just mobbed him. And it was just like, and he was more than gracious, shook hands, said hi, signed
Oh.
autographs, was just one of the sweetest men, and actually stayed outside with us. It was in November, so it was very cold, and he hung out outside of his. He didn't go back to his trailer. He stayed outside and talked to all of us, and I got to shake his hand. I shook his hand real quick because I was nervous, but
Oh my gosh.
that was a great for someone that grew up idolizing him and still misses him to this day. That was a great moment. So the fact that you got to hang around like these amazing actors that I think there's so many great actors that were on The Walking Dead, and I think that that's what established it as the show that it became because you had great acting. And I always say that the horror that we love, the horror movies, it all comes down to the people, and I think that sometimes filmmakers forget that. um,
Yeah.
but like I think Andrew Lincoln is a great actor, and Denai Guerrero is a great actress, and Laura Cohn, Stephen Yun, everybody that was on that show, Norman Reedus, Melissa McBride. There's just so many great people, and I think that's what kept bringing people back
Oh yeah.
to that show was the people. And I think that's why going back to Glenn dying, I think it was too much of a, even though we knew it was hinted at and it was foreshadowed a couple times. I think it was
Yeah.
still once Abraham died, you were like, oh, that's who they're going to kill. And then flipped and it hit him too. You're going, oh. I still
It
remember
was
watching it.
stunning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rough episode. It is not an episode you want to just put on because that is brutal.
It's hard.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, I love the arc of Negan. That's one thing I loved about that show, and I think that's where it was strong towards its finale because you had this venomous villain, but then you understood like, what if you were following Negan and his crew instead of Rick and that crew? Then you would have been like, well, Rick killed all of their people, and like that scene, there's a scene between him and Maggie where he says, "I would have killed all of you." Because he said all I knew is that somebody came in and killed these people. They had families, same
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I thought that that was great because sometimes they make villains too one-sided, and there was layers to Negan, even though he was over the top and insane, and he still, there was a connection between him and Carl. There was this thing about
Yeah.
him that you go, there is a person there is humanity to him, and I feel like you saw that come out more as the seasons and the show eventually wrapped.
Those were some of my favorite days, was to like watch those scenes like happen, because there were so many points in that 11th season that it was just Maggie and Negan. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was a really good plot because, I mean, you have this person who did like a really, really horrible thing to their person's husband, and like, I don't know, I did enjoy actually watching, because usually you go to set and you stand in, and most of the time you're exhausted, and then you go grab your snack and you're on your phone at your chair, and those, like, I actually did enjoy standing
Mm-hmm.
nearby and watching, and like watching them rehearse, because we had to do that before we did our job, and like that was the coolest to me, was just to watch, I don't know, watch them
Well, that's
make it
awesome.
happen.
The fact that you were just, even just being around that, to me is it's a gift. Acting is a craft, and being able to witness that firsthand is just amazing, I bet.
Well, and it was, I mean, it was really all luck that I ended up there, because I was so shy there. Like, I think back at how awkward I was sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I hadn't really found my confidence as a person yet. So I was like, I was just there to make the money and try not to get fired and make anyone mad. And
Mhm.
like, I remember, because I went into it, I did want to be an actor. Um, and that just like didn't end up, you know, it was what I wanted to do. But then I remember there was one day, an actress
Mhm.
called out sick,
Mhm.
and not, not the best situation, but they, I remember some of the, I believe it was the first AD and two of the
Mhm.
producers were standing next to me, and they were talking. They're like, well, we just need someone to wear her clothes and say her lines. Like, we can just film from the back. And I'm standing there, and I'm just like not trying not to be part of the conversation. All of a sudden, I hear someone say, well, what about Gracie? And they all looked over, and then they looked back, and one of them goes, yeah, that'll work. And they walked away, and nobody said anything to me. And they sent a PA over later to
That's
tell me,
nerve-wracking.
and he was like, also, I was told to give you these sides, learn these, or like, I think they were on my phone. They made sure I had the sides somehow, and like, all of a sudden, I'm learning these lines. They're like, you'll get changed in an hour, and like, I remember that the director we were working with was not my favorite. She was very disorganized, and like, then they decided I was too tall to stand it, but literally like, or to
Oh.
double. But at that point, like, I'm in the clothes, and
Yeah,
it's
I
like
would
we got
say.
40 minutes left to shoot before they cut us off. So after that night, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this. And I did get to read lines a few more times, like over anytime you see, there was usually a fight about it, because usually, like, if you see anyone on a radio on the
Mhm.
show, there was always one, the PA that worked with us a lot would come up and be like, okay, who wants to read the lines on the walkie today? And all of us were like,
Oh, wow.
not it, not it. And so, I mean, it was cool the few times I got to do it, but I definitely, like, it was a lot of pressure, and you're in that quiet studio, and they're like pointing at you, and you got to turn the radio on. Like, it's a lot. But after that, I was like, I don't think acting's my thing. And I ended up doing costumes, which,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's
Awesome.
kind of where I'm at now.
Is that what you're
That's
doing? I was going to ask you, like, what are you into? Like, since I don't know if you're, I know that the Daryl show is shooting in France. I know that. I don't know where they shot Dead City or the new one with Andrew Lincoln and Denai. I don't know if they're
so
shooting in the same area.
that was in Dead City was in New York. And a
Okay,
lot
they
of
actually went to New York.
mostly
Okay.
Yeah, some of the teams traveled over. Like the makeup team pretty much goes everywhere that Greg Nicotero goes, and
Yeah,
he
yeah,
really
absolutely.
does a good job of keeping his people on. I I've heard so many different things about the um
The new
the
one.
Rick and Michonne show.
Yeah,
I'm hearing that they were gonna use our old studio. I don't know. I don't know. Like it's all rumor, but
yeah. That
yeah.
seems like that was. It seemed like that kind of got because of the pandemic. I feel like that kind of because they were supposed to do from going, just My Walking Dead, because I mean I was into the show.
Yeah.
Then when Rick left, they said they were going to do movies, like movie theater movies with him, and I'm like going, oh, that's cool. And then it kind of like was quiet, and I'm like, what's going on with the Rick movies? And then they talked about a show, and I'm like, oh, okay, well that kind of makes more sense. And then it was like this whole thing that they're doing now, which I'm like, okay, well, I just want to see, you know, Andrew Lincoln is amazing, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
see, what happened to him.
Tell you one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me in reference to that show. You
Mhm.
know, we went all season and like everybody, even on set, were like, "Is Rick coming back? Like, are we doing this?" And all of us were like, "No, he's not gonna come back." Like, and we we shot a whole ending that was not Rick. I mean, we shot the ending,
Oh,
thought
for the
that was
fun.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original ending of the finale was not Rick. And we, wrapped up the show, everything was good. That was April of 2022. In November of 2022, right around the time, like it was the Thursday before the final episode aired,
Hmm.
I got an email that was like, you're invited, um, like the premiere of the finale.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I was like, oh, okay. And like
Awesome.
I look at it and it says the Orpheum Theater, and I'm thinking, is that in Atlanta? I've never heard of that. And so I looked it up, and it was said like thousands of miles away, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is in California.
Yeah.
So I booked a ticket that day. Probably one of the most impulsive thing I've ever done besides driving to the show on the same day.
Yeah.
But they asked me, and I booked a flight. I went from Jacksonville. I was on vacation with my family. I flew from Jacksonville at like 3 in the morning, um,
Wow.
to Charlotte, North Carolina. Then I flew to LA. I went to the premiere that night, and I remember we were all sitting in the Orpheum Theater. They had all the crew members on the floor. Then they had like the fans that were there in the top of the theater. I only ended up being there like just I didn't even stay overnight, but we were sitting there and we were watching the final episode, and we get to the ending,
Hmm.
and I'm expecting what we shot and stood in
Hmm.
for. Like I was, and all of a sudden it was like, I don't even remember how it happened, but it's like Rick or Michonne sitting by the fire. And every time anything crazy happened, we knew most of what was going to happen, of course, with Rosita
Hmm.
getting bit
Yeah.
and such. We were all expecting it. And so you see her fall into the crowd, and you hear all the fans in the top of the theaters like scream, and then
Hmm.
they were cheering at different parts. Anytime a cool one-liner was dropped, like they'd cheer. And I'm telling you, even the crew members, like our jaws were on the floor when Rick showed up because none of us knew that was happening.
That's
And
crazy.
my friend, one of my really close friends, he obviously worked with me on the show for a long time, but he was Rick's stand-in for
Oh,
all the
wow.
seasons.
Awesome.
And he had messaged me that he got asked to go back like a few months after we had wrapped, and I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, yeah, it's a promotional for the new Rick show. And I was like, oh, that's cool. We get in the theater, and he looked over at me when Rick showed up, and he was like, I was like, you weren't shooting a promo? And he was like, no, no, I wasn't.
Wow.
But
Well, that's smart though. I mean, again, it's. I think you had to do that with that finale because people were just like, "Where is he?" And it was just like he was on like a beach, and you see the city, and then you see the helicopter come down, and I'm like, going, "Okay, we're finally getting to it." But so with The Walking Dead, and so are you still doing extra work now? Are you still involved in that? Or you said you were getting into costuming more now, or?
yeah, I didn't. I think I'm done with because after I did all the zombie stuff, I was kind of done with extra work for a little bit. I did extra work on Stranger Things right near like
Oh
the
wow.
end of the lockdown in 2020, and that was about the last time I did extra work. And
Okay.
then I, through friends on the show, I was interested in it was a lot of what am I going to do next? We've all been here for years. Um, and I talked to one of my friends and she was like, I hear you're interested in doing costumes. I was like, actually, yeah, I am. And she got me a gig
Nice.
for a Netflix show. And so I did costumes on that for a few months. And then I moved over to Tyler Perry for a few months. And then,
Oh wow, that's awesome.
yeah, and so that was, I really found my place there. I was a production assistant for the costumes department, which the next time, I'm not on a set right now, post strike, I'm kind of just sewing on the side.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm
But you're back to
hoping the
the
next time I'm on a set, it's not as a production assistant. I see myself either ending up in a tailor shop, honestly,
Mhm.
because I got really into sewing on the
That's
show I
cool.
worked on. Well, yeah, it was pretty awesome. So I think that's definitely what I'll stay with when I go back
You
to,
found your calling. That's great. I mean,
yeah,
I think that's cool. It's sort of like you started with one thing and it led to, doing what you really want to do. And that,
absolutely.
I mean, and that strike just ended like a few months ago. A lot of people don't realize how long that thing went on for. I mean, that was nuts,
Yeah.
but I was completely supporting everybody. That's,
Yeah.
these studios are killing these poor writers and actors, and just
Yep.
so I was 100%, just pay them what they're worth. It's like it's
Absolutely.
not fair. These studios are making tons of money, and these actors aren't getting anything, and especially with streaming and all this other stuff that's going on. Well, this
Yeah.
has been a lot of fun just sort of speaking with you about your career and your love of the horror genre and what movies you're looking forward to come out this year. I think there's going to be some really good ones this year. Beetlejuice too, so that'll be fun because Jenna's going to be in that, and
Oh
that's a
yeah.
big one for me because I love Beetlejuice. So, but no, thank you so much, Gracie. I hope we can do this again and we can talk about
Oh
some other
yeah.
stuff. I'm sure we could talk for probably 2 more hours on stuff,
Oh,
but
I could. Yeah. For
but I
sure.
feel like I feel like this was good. We sort of got a little breath of just your career and your interests. And again, thank you for being my first interview. And I hope I did it okay. It was
You're great. Thank you so much for having me, and I can talk horror anytime. So,
well, hopefully we can do this again soon. So thank you so much for your time. And I want to thank everyone in my audience for watching. And I will talk to you again very, very soon. Take it easy. Stay scared as always. Peace. Hey, my fellow Fright Fiends, I just want to thank everyone for supporting Boogeyman Ben's Horror Zone. If you haven't yet subscribed and you'd like to, please hit the subscribe button down below. Click the bell notification so you're updated every time I drop a new video. I try to drop a video at least once or twice a week. The Horror Zone is a passion of mine, and it really makes me happy that I can share that passion with all of you guys. Thanks so much again for the support, and I'll talk to you again real soon. Take it easy. Stay scared as always. Peace.